We'll have the next panelist come on up. And we're going to dive right into to the next panelist. We have Linda Lowe from APCO, Abe Diaz from Amazon, and Amanda Morgan from Save the Children. And this is great because Abe and I were talking with his team, and I said the theme of our conference is co-creation, and I described what we were trying to do. He said, wait a second, that's just like the working backwards model at Amazon. And I said, tell me more. So I think this is going to be really interesting. It really aligns with what we're talking about today. Again, takes a very concrete idea that Amazon has been doing, and Abe will tell you more. He's working on the disaster relief team at Amazon, and also working with Save the Children's, also working with AWS on their nonprofit technologies. So with that, I'll turn it over to Linda.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I know it's always hard in the afternoon after lunch. All of our blood flows from our head to our stomach. So thanks for staying with us. We are here as the final conversation before Kirsten comes back to close the day. And the theme throughout the 2 days has been co-creation for global development. And really excited to be here with both of you to talk about how you've been working together at Amazon, at Save the Children, using Amazon's working back model, a form of co-creation, how you've been breaking things, fixing things, making new things. It is really personally a pleasure to be here with you. I used to work for the International Red Cross and supported their humanitarian response in Ukraine back in 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea. So I'm really eager to learn what you've been doing. I also want to say thank you to both of you and your organizations for all the important work that you're doing in humanitarian response, disaster relief. So Amanda, I'm going to start with you. A question about what's happening in Ukraine right now. How many people are affected? What are the biggest needs, and how are needs changing?
Thanks. So you've probably been following along with the news. Life in Ukraine is extremely difficult, and it's difficult for everyone across the country. It's also really difficult for humanitarian aid workers. So not only our own staff at Save the Children working in Ukraine, but all of the local organizations that are reaching out into some of the hardest to reach communities, both in the east and the south, and it's really difficult. Numbers are hard to come by, but I think people generally agree there's about 17 million people in need right now inside Ukraine. That doesn't even account for the nearly 16 million people who left Ukraine when the war started. There has been some cross-border back and forth, so those numbers on the number of people who fled Ukraine and now are in Europe and in the US and other places is not entirely known. So right now, it started to snow in November, so they are squarely within winter. Temperatures will drop below zero. And this is hard for those families that are still in Ukraine that are living in shelters. There's so many people are displaced in Ukraine, and they're living in shelters in schools and community centers. Those are not good conditions. It's also hard for those families who have moved back into their homes or are living in home settings that have been hit by missiles, that have been destroyed. So kind of looking across the country, regardless of the situation that they find themselves in, they are in desperate need of food. They're in desperate need of water, fuel, energy. It really is heartbreaking to see where the country was at the start of the war and where they are today. Things are not much better. And so when you're in conflict zones, we don't know when things are going to change, because it's not that there's, it's changing by the hour. It's not changing by the day. And so that is incredibly difficult for humanitarian organizations to be able to react to when they themselves are in bunkers. There's times where I'm not able to get information because they can't come out of their bunkers to safely take a call. children can't come out of their bunkers to get online to go to school. And so that picture is really difficult.
Thank you for sharing what's happening on the ground from your sort of hands-on perspective in your team. The headlines are headlines, 280 character tweets, things like that. But to hear your perspective of what's happening right now is so important. And your work and everyone's work makes it even more important. I'd like to, Abe, ask you the next question. We've been talking about co-creation, and Kristen just talked about how your working back model is very aligned with co-creating. And so I'd like to ask, when you've been working at Amazon with Save the Children in the response, what is the working back model? What does that look like, and how is it making it possible for the two organizations to co-create in what is a very fast-changing, fluid, challenging situation?
One thing I'll say is I think it's part of the company lore that our CEO in the past used to have an empty chair on some of the big important meetings. People would come into the room late, try to sit in that chair, and you're like, no, that chair is for the customer, right? And you're like, oh my God. But after a while, that sticks. And it's just a reminder of the customer should be part of the conversation. So that's what that reminds us of. The working backwards model in Amazon is basically, we start with this document called the PRFAQ, which is a press release / frequently asked questions. And it basically explains if you are launching this project tomorrow, right, for any of Amazon business teams, what would that look like? What would we be telling the world that we are launching? And a lot of the times, it's pretty accurate what they write months in advance versus what the teams are actually able to ship. And part of it is because they work backwards from that vision, from here's what we want to launch, here's what we want to tell the world about, here's what we're providing our customers, and then what do we need to make that happen? So you start working backwards from that. Well, what part of the operations needs to change to support that? What technology do we need to build? What different products or selection, or et cetera, et cetera. So for us, when we take that concept and apply it into our work, is really working with our nonprofits, like Save the Children. Many of the people in this room are our customer. So how can we start building a solution with the customer in mind? So I think for Ukraine was such a fast-moving situation where we really had to sit down and build on top of the trust that at least Amazon and Save the Children have had over the past many years, and sit down and be honest to each other and say, okay, what is it, that solution that we can build here? And part of that is having an honest conversation about strengths and weaknesses for both parts of the equation, and go like, this is what we can do, this is what we can't do, this is what you're best at, this is what we're best at, and then start building with that in mind.
So I understand the model. It's customer first. In this case, we did a little cheat. We had a little talking session last week. So you talked about who is the customer in that empty seat. In this case, I remember you telling me it was the mother, it was the father, it was the child that needs something immediately. So in this case, I'm gonna lead with you, Amanda, and jump in anytime, Abe. We've both talked about how humanitarian response is so complex, fast changing. In Ukraine, what has been the key challenge or challenges, and how has this working back model with Amazon enabled Save the Children to respond differently?
Sure. So with that context change, I think what's happening now is quite different from what was happening in the very beginning days, weeks, even months, right? Months, yeah. And so, we said it before, the speed at which we had to respond to families fleeing Ukraine was intense. So Save the Children's been working in Ukraine since 2014, and we've also have country offices in Romania, in Lithuania, and we now have an office in Poland. And so for us, we were there prepping families before they left. We were providing cash assistance, clothing, getting them ready, but we didn't know for how long. They had no idea for how long. And then in most refugee situations, people left with whatever they had in hand and maybe even lost along the way across their journey across Ukraine, which is a very large country. And then our staff were there at the borders in Romania and eventually Poland, along with local organizations that we work with, receiving them. And so, you know, looking at that customer, so, and for us, it's our customer too, is what did they need? And also, what did our response team need? So in speaking with some of our response team members, they were receiving one person would receive 300 to 400 emails a day, every day, constantly. That is what the reality of that looks like. And so what Save the Children needed, we needed an end-to-end solution. Our response team was not able to work with many corporations that were coming to us and saying, what do you need? And it was like, they couldn't even deal with that question, because then there were so many questions behind that it was really when Amazon, within 24 hours, called, and yes, I got woken up at 12:30 at night, and Dave doesn't know this, because I had to make the decision is, what do we do next? Because there's internal processes at Save the Children, and we have rules of you know, vetting a partnership, and what are we going to do next, and what does that mean? And I said, we're not going to do that, and I'm going to take a personal risk, and I'm going to make a call to the global humanitarian director to say, this is what's on the table. And that's very different from any other humanitarian response I had been a part of. And I've worked at Save the Children now for 7 years, and seen a few responses. And so it took us a couple of years to get to that point where we can say, oh no, we trust this partner. We know that we can move forward because of all of what we've done before. And so really it was about that. They're going to come with a solution that they know every part of their business is going to be able to drive this forward. And that was the only way that we could do that, and get buy-in from our response team and our leaders to say, okay, we're going to try to make this work.
And for us, we basically said, if we're going to do this, it's going to be with Save the Children, because we were looking at the landscape, and the things that were different were, you know, we're dealing with mom and kids, right? Like a lot of the dads had to stay. So if we're looking at families and children, like it was like the best organization. Again, we trust each other, and we were able to say, what are your challenges? And also, I think many years of working in different disasters, understanding the life cycle allowed us to say, here's how we're going to split it. We started with cash immediately. Understood that, like, here's money, you're going to need it. Get back to us within a week so we can understand what are the products that you need, what are the logistical challenges you have, what are the other assets that we can come into the conversation with, to then participate with, and slowly start designing a long-term solution.
Yeah, and actually when we did our secret pre-conversation last week, you gave some really interesting examples about co-creating, working backwards in the moment. You just mentioned you started with cash. You gave some other great examples last week about how the needs changed, how you responded, and how unexpected support came in, and how you handled that as well. Do you remember that? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so one of the things we do is we do a lot of product donations. We've delivered over 20 million products across more than 100 disasters globally. But it's usually Amazon product, right? One of the things that happened with Save the Children is they also had other corporate partners that wanted to participate with like toys and other stuff. And we said, like, how do we do that? How do we handle that? Because there's no single giant refugee location or shelter that has everybody coming in there. They were getting distributed across all of a lot of the Europe. And one of the things that we said, well, we deliver packages to everybody every day. We can take in a lot of product and then start finding ways for us to get to multiple locations in parallel. And that's what we did. We created 2 logistical hubs, one in Slovakia, one in Poland, where Save the Children and other partners could just take in massive amounts of donations. We would take that, our ops team would take in those pallets, and then slowly work into what distribution would look like, and then we could use our other assets, the vans and the delivery guys, to get that to where people were at.
And I remember one of the things that really struck me when we spoke last week, Amanda, you talked about, there are obviously basic needs like water, food, shelter, and then other resources came in that there's no way Save the Children could have deployed or handled that people still needed. For example, you talked about books.
Yeah, so one of the things is that we look at all of the well-being of a whole child, right? And so that goes beyond water and food. I looked at the wish lists. I mean, I hope you know what wish lists are on Amazon, but I looked at the wish list, and in the beginning days of the response, they needed gloves, they needed hats, they needed blankets, and they needed diapers and wipes, and those are the things that Save the Children. We know kids, and we know that's what they need, but we know they also need books, and there are children who are still in bunkers. And so we started creating bunker kits. And so those bunker kits have books, and they have developmental toys for children who are very young up until their middle school. And so all of those things need to come together to be packaged, and then they need to be distributed within the countries that these children are in. And we couldn't possibly take all of that product all at once. And so I think one of the really great things about how this worked is that we went into working with Amazon knowing that this is a long-term response. And it's going to be months and months where we're going to be able to access that product, but then all the parts of their business that they're bringing forward. And so it wasn't just the products and the logistics, but it's also their translation services. And they were able to produce books in Ukrainian and Russian and probably Polish and and so for a child to be able to have books in their own language and still be able to learn how to count and learn their alphabet. Those are the things that are hugely important to the psychological well-being of the children, not only the children, but their parents. And how can you parent when you are desperately frightened for your child and for yourself? And so, we bring in psychologists and mental health support, but it's really about looking at the well-being of that whole child, and that includes the family as well. And so it was just incredible to see. I mean, books in a response come in months and months later. And in this response, it was just incredible to see how quickly they could pull it off.
Thankfully, we know a thing or two about books. But the other great part was, like, as Amanda mentioned, the integration of multiple teams within Amazon, right? It's like being able to have like AWS's translation services and say, like, upload one document and then translate that into like 7 languages, and like in minutes that sort of stuff is done, and then take that and bring it to the book on demand publishing. Like this whole thing happened within Amazon at a speed that I've never seen before. So like being able to like trust that you guys did all the research, and like this is the book that we need, and us saying, great, let's go and do it, was just magic in motion.
Such a wonderful example of co-creation that is practical, tactical impact, immediate need. Thank you, both. So I'm going to wrap up with 2 more questions. Today and yesterday has been all about learning together. So I'd like to ask both of you if you have any learnings or advice you'd like to share with this global Washington community that is convened here today, all of us who are so dedicated to helping to build more resilient communities, sustainable solutions that we can co-create together with communities, with each other. What have you learned? What can you teach us?
I would say if there's one thing I would want you to take away from this conversation is that true partnership really requires 3 things. It's trust, but with that honesty. And you said it before, but we have to be honest about what we can do and what we can't do, and be okay with that and work around that. That requires constant communication. Sometimes the teams were working together, speaking once, twice a day. I have colleagues who now consider Amazon as an extension of the response team. That's what it takes. But then also business awareness. And so Amazon knows who they are. They know what they can deliver, and Save the Children does as well. So we've been around for 100 years, and we know what we do well. Some people are not so good at saying what they don't do well. We're getting there. But it's really about self-awareness and business awareness. And if you can do those things, and you can be drastically transparent and be good at communicator, then that's what's going to be needed for success.
It's hard to follow up on that. But what I'll say is we can only be this self-aware because we've had years of being open to try things out. And our list of successes is about as big as our list of failures. And we tried many things across multiple disasters. I think Ukraine was one of those things where we said, hey, everything that we have learned on every earthquake, every volcano, every hurricane, every flood, we can take all of those learnings and apply them to this like massive situation, and understand and know that yes, we can do that, and we can do that. We have that confidence because we've tried that before. So I think it's like building and fostering the culture of iteration and trying things in a small scale. Like always start small, test it out, learn, iterate, and go to a bigger market, go to a bigger, audience. That's key. And then the other thing is, I always say this, be specific. If you are an organization, you're reaching out to somebody who's a corporate partner you've never worked with before, like, don't start with like, we need everything you can give us. No, you don't. Right? We have partners that they just are overwhelmed with what I call the Amazon hug of death. It's like, well, you asked me for that many diapers. And no, I wanted diapers, not that many boxes of diapers. Like, well, that's a big delta. So be specific. Say like, here's what we need, where we need it, how much we need. These are the products in your website, for example, right? If you're working with another partner, just be very specific. You'll have a much higher chance of getting a yes than getting a no if you did some of that pre-work. Because the same way as you're coming into a partner, there's like a bunch of other partners coming to us. So be specific, and you'll be more successful.
Such great advice. I say that to my son all the time. We have the honor of closing, or having the final word, I'll say, before Kristen comes back up on stage to close the day together. So I want to end this on a positive note. And I want to ask you, given your experience in Ukraine together, given your experiences over your past many years of working in development and your life experiences, what is making you hopeful right now? Big question.
Well, we just came from a session, and I was describing it to somebody as this was depressing, yet at the same time very hopeful and insightful. Because the work that we do is hard, but at the same time, nobody's leaving the room, right? We're in it for the long run. So like, what I'm hopeful is that like the same energy that you all have had after 2 years of a pandemic and a year of war, that it continues, and that you can, hire and bring in new people into your teams that can help you like push that energy forward. So I'm hopeful for what the future and some of the newer people coming into this industry will do.
I like that. I think when you're saying yes, it's depressing, and at Save the Children, I feel like I go to one depressing meeting after another. But what I look towards is I go back to the children, and so it can be some long days, but then I kind of pull back my experiences of when I go out and I get to meet kids, or I get to hear stories of colleagues who come back and say, oh, I just came back, and this is what a child said to me, and it never ceases to amaze me. their resilience, and their capacity to survive, but not just survive, but thrive. And so I'll leave you with the words of a child. So Irina, she's 10. She's from Ukraine. She's now in Poland. She talked about how the bombing started around 4 a.m. and they got into their car. They were supposed to go to the grandparents' house and pick their grandparents up, and then they couldn't. That wasn't possible. So they lived with some friends for a month, and then that became unsustainable. So the mother decided we've got to go to Poland, and they left their dad, they left their grandparents and their pets. The kids always talk about their pets. It's very cute. But they went to Poland, and she had shared after she went to summer camp all summer in a program that we were offering these kids, and she finally could start talking about other things than the bombs. And she started talking about the friends she met, the games that she got to play, and she said that the one thing that she felt that was helping her move on was education. And no matter what country I go to, or what program it is, the kids always talk about school. And so I think after living through COVID and not being able to go to school and online learning, I mean, we all should know that school for kids is the number one most important thing, and also for their parents as well. So Irina is doing well, and she's happy to be in school. So that makes me happy.
That's beautiful. Amanda and Abe, thank you to your organizations, to you for all that you're doing, for taking the midnight calls, and for sharing your learnings with us. To all of you for convening, and Kristen for creating this space for us to convene together today. Thank you very much, Amanda and Abe.
Thank you all. So great. Thank you. Thanks, Abe. This was great. This whole time I was thinking, wait a second. This morning we were talking about co-creation, that it takes time. It has to be deliberative. It has to be gathering the stakeholders and doing all these things. I'm like, how can they do this in an emergency and respond that quickly? And then obviously you answered the question. Because of all the prep beforehand, right? It was the relationships they built. It was the trust that they built. And all of the communication that you did even before the crisis happened. So I think that's a great way to end our conference, because now it is all up to you all.